This widow's desperate kiss to a reformed gang member changed everything when an old debt of honor brought an entire neighborhood together to fight injustice. Like if you believe in second chances. Subscribe for more inspiring tales and comment where you're watching from. The salt air carried the scent of seaweed and distant rain as Marisol Vega pushed through the rusted gate of her small coastal home. Her weathered hands trembled slightly, not from the ocean breeze, but from the doctor's words still echoing in her mind. The consultation had been brief, clinical, final. She needed rest, the physician had said. Stress management. At 62, her heart couldn't handle much more. But as she approached her front door, unfamiliar voices spilled from within. Loud, confident laughter, heavy footsteps on her husband's carefully polished hardwood floors. Strangers in her home. Marisol's breath caught as she stepped inside. 3 men in expensive suits occupied her living room, spreading papers across her coffee table like they owned the place. One, a thin man with slicked hair, looked up with practiced indifference. Mrs. Vega, perfect timing. His voice carried the hollow cheerfulness of a telemarketer. We were just organizing the transition paperwork. Transition? The word felt foreign on her tongue. The foreclosure proceedings. Didn't you receive our notices? He gestured to a stack of official-looking documents. Everything's been processed through the county. Your mortgage default triggered the automatic sale clause. Marisol's legs nearly buckled. There's no default. I've never missed a payment. The man's smile never wavered. Unfortunately, the records show otherwise, Mr. Harrison here. He nodded to a heavy-set man photographing her wedding pictures. Represents the new buyers. They're being very generous, allowing you time to collect personal items. Through the window, she glimpsed her neighbor Nora peering through her blinds, then quickly looking away. A teenage boy across the street held up his phone, recording. Before his mother yanked him inside, the house felt wrong. The coffee scent that usually lingered from her morning routine was replaced by expensive cologne. The gentle creak of the front door, which had welcomed her husband home for 30 years, was muffled by a stranger's leather briefcase propping it open. I need to see those papers, Marisol's voice cracked. Of course. The thin man handed her a folder. Though I should mention, the legal language can be quite complex. Perhaps you'd prefer to have an attorney review them. Somewhere else, naturally, while we handle the property assessment. Her phone buzzed. Roberto from the laundromat, checking if she was all right. He'd seen the cars, he said. Wanted to help. But what could an elderly man who pressed shirts for a living do against legal documents and men in suits? Mrs. Vega, the thin man continued, his tone shifting to gentle patronization. We understand this is overwhelming, but fighting this will only create legal complications you can't afford. Why don't you gather what you need for tonight? We'll make sure everything else is properly inventoried. Marisol clutched the folder, its contents swimming before her blurred vision. 30 years of marriage, 5 years of widowhood, 6 decades of life, reduced to a stack of papers she couldn't understand, signed by lawyers she'd never met, enforced by men who looked through her like she was already gone. Until tomorrow, then, the heavy-set man said, sliding her wedding photo into a plastic bag labeled Personal Effects. Mrs. M. Vega will be here bright and early to continue the assessment. The front door closed with a finality that echoed through the empty spaces of her heart. Outside, the ocean wind had picked up, carrying the sound of distant waves against the Harbor Falls coastline. But inside, Marisol could only hear the silence where her husband's voice used to be, where her own life used to matter. She walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet where she kept her emergency savings, and found it exactly as she'd left it. $3,000 in small bills, not enough for lawyers, not enough to fight men with briefcases and official papers, not enough to save the only home she'd ever known. As darkness settled over the small coastal town, Marisol sat on her front steps, holding the folder of documents she couldn't read and didn't understand. Tomorrow, they would return. Tomorrow, she would have to leave. Tonight, she would sit in the salt air and remember what it felt like to belong somewhere. The laundromat's fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as Marisol sorted through the box she'd retrieved from beneath her husband's workbench. Soft cotton shirts, worn flannel, the lingering scent of his aftershave mixed with lavender sachets she'd tucked between the folds years ago. Her fingers found the envelope near the bottom, yellowed with age, sealed but for a corner that had lifted over time, written in Miguel's careful handwriting. 47, for M. When the time comes. She'd never seen it before. Outside, Harbor Falls Main Street stretched quiet under the evening fog. The few remaining shops, Roberto's laundromat, the corner grocery, Mrs. Chen's flower shop, cast warm squares of light onto empty sidewalks. This part of town had seen better decades. Young families moved to the newer developments inland. Only the stubborn remained, clinging to ocean views and memories. But lately, even the stubborn were feeling pressure. Mrs. Patterson, 3 blocks over, had mentioned strange visits from real estate agents. Mr. Kowalski found his mailbox stuffed with cash offers from companies he'd never heard of. Nothing threatening, nothing direct, just persistent, relentless. Marisol turned the envelope over, studying Miguel's handwriting. He'd been careful with words, deliberate with decisions. If he'd hidden this, there was a reason. Through the laundromat's windows, she noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour. Same model as the one outside her house that morning. The driver sat motionless, occasionally glancing her way before returning to his phone. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, a single piece of paper, a phone number written in blue ink, and beneath it, a few lines in Miguel's steady script. Marisol, if someone tries to take what's ours, call this number. Tell them Miguel Vega from the Harbor Falls Mercado sent you. Tell them about the window he fixed in 1987, the kit he drove to the hospital in 89, the groceries he delivered during the storm in 92. They remember debts of honor. They'll remember mine. Beneath the note, a small photograph, Miguel standing next to a tall young man with dark hair and intense eyes. Both were younger. The picture faded with age. The young man's arm bore tattoos she could barely make out, and his leather jacket bore patches she didn't recognize. But his eyes, even in the old photograph, they held something Miguel always recognized in people: the capacity for protection, for doing what was right when it mattered. The fluorescent lights flickered once, casting momentary shadows across the note. Outside, the black sedan's engine started, then pulled away slowly, deliberately, its taillights disappearing into the coastal fog. Marisol folded the paper carefully, slipping it into her coat pocket alongside the mysterious photograph. Miguel had always been a good judge of character. In 40 years of marriage, he'd never been wrong about who could be trusted. The question now was whether a number written 20 years ago would still connect her to someone willing to honor an old debt. She locked the laundromat, stepped into the cool evening air, and walked the 6 blocks home. The house sat dark, except for the porch light Miguel had installed the year before his heart attack. Motion activated, he'd said, so she'd never come home to darkness. Tonight, it illuminated an eviction notice taped to her front door. Marisol read it twice, the legal language washing over her like a cold wave. 72 hours to vacate. Failure to comply would result in forcible removal by county sheriff. She pulled out the envelope, studied the number again, then looked up at the stars barely visible through the coastal haze. Miguel, she whispered to the night wind, I hope you know what you're asking me to do. Marisol stared at her phone for 20 minutes before dialing. The number rang 3 times before a deep voice answered, cautious but not unkind. Yeah, is this... She checked the paper again. Is this Eli? A pause. Depends who's asking. My name is Marisol Vega. My husband was Miguel Vega. He said you might remember him. The silence stretched long enough that Marisol thought the connection had failed. When Eli spoke again, his voice had changed entirely. Miguel, Jesus, Miguel from the Mercado. Another pause. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but Miguel passed, few years back now. Heart attack. I know. Her voice cracked despite her efforts. I'm his widow. Oh Christ, Mrs. Vega, Miguel was a good man. Real good man. He helped a lot of us when nobody else would. The careful distance in his voice dissolved into something warmer. What can I do for you? She found herself crying then, the words tumbling out between shaky breaths. The house, the papers, the men in suits, the eviction notice, everything she'd held inside since Miguel died. Every small indignity and large injustice that had accumulated like sediment in her chest. They're taking my home, she finished. Tomorrow, and I don't know what to do. Eli listened without interrupting. She could hear him moving, footsteps on what sounded like metal stairs, a door closing, the distant hum of traffic. Mrs. Vega, he said finally, I need you to tell me exactly what Miguel told you about calling this number. She read the note verbatim, including the specific incidents Miguel had referenced. With each detail, Eli's breathing grew more measured. The window in 87, he said softly. I put my fist through his store window during a fight with my girlfriend. Drunk, angry, stupid. instead of calling the cops. Miguel made me sweep up the glass and work in his stockroom until I'd paid for the replacement. Took 3 months. The hospital run in '89. My friend Marcus got jumped. Miguel didn't ask questions. Just drove us to Harbor General in his delivery truck. Stayed until Marcus was stabilized. And the storm. Hurricane Elena. Power was out for a week. Miguel loaded his truck with canned goods and bottled water. Drove to every apartment complex where our guys lived. Wouldn't take payment. Said neighborhoods take care of each other. Marisol closed her eyes, hearing her husband's voice in every word. That was Miguel. Quiet generosity, stubborn kindness. Mrs. Vega, I need you to listen carefully. Miguel did more than help people. He believed in second chances when nobody else did. Half the guys I run with now. We'd be dead or in prison if not for your husband. His voice grew firm. You said they're taking your house tomorrow. 72 hours. But the men will be back in the morning. What's the address? She gave it to him. I know that street. Pretty neighborhood. Good people. A pause. Ma'am, I can't promise anything, but Miguel's debt to me isn't mine to him. It's mine to the neighborhood he cared about. You understand? I think so. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Early. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone inside. Don't be afraid. Can you do that? For the first time in days, Marisol felt her shoulders relax. Yes, good. And Mrs. Vega, Miguel was lucky to have you. We all knew that. After hanging up, she sat in her kitchen holding the phone, watching fog roll past her window. Outside, Harbor Falls slept under its blanket of ocean mist, but somewhere in the darkness, a debt 20 years old was being remembered, and tomorrow, she would learn what that meant. Marisol arrived at the laundromat before sunrise. Unable to sleep, she'd spent the night alternating between hope and terror, replaying Eli's voice, Miguel's note, the certainty in the thin man's smile. At 7:30, she spotted him walking down the street, tall, broader than the photograph suggested, wearing a simple gray jacket over dark jeans. His black hair showed silver at the temples now, and the tattoos she'd glimpsed in the old picture were covered, but his eyes held the same intensity Miguel had trusted. He approached slowly, respectfully, stopping a careful distance away. Mrs. Vega? She nodded, unable to speak. I'm Eli Dresden. He extended his hand, and she noticed his knuckles bore old scars, his palm calloused from honest work. I want you to know, before anything else, that Miguel saved my life, multiple times, in ways I couldn't understand when I was young and stupid. Something in his voice, in the way he held himself, steady, protective, genuinely sorrowful about her loss, broke through her reserve. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek, a gentle, desperate gesture that spoke louder than words. Please, she whispered against his shoulder. Help me. He stepped back, studied her face with those same intense eyes from the photograph, then nodded once. Miguel's debt is my honor. Wait here. He walked to the corner, pulled out his phone, and made 3 quick calls. Short conversations, just facts, and an address. Then he returned to her side. Mrs. Vega, in about 10 minutes, some friends of mine are going to start arriving. They're good people, all of them. Reformed, working honest jobs, building honest lives, but they remember what it means to protect neighborhood. She started to ask what he meant, but the sound of motorcycles rumbling in the distance answered her question. Not loud, aggressive engines, but the steady purr of well-maintained bikes ridden by careful men. The first to arrive was a compact Latino man with graying temples, riding a pristine vintage Honda. He parked, removed his helmet, and approached with a respectful nod. Mrs. Vega, I'm Carlos. I work construction now, but I knew your husband, good man. Next came a tall black man driving a pickup truck loaded with carpentry tools. Marcus, he introduced himself, shaking her hand gently. Miguel drove me to the hospital once. Never forgot that kindness. Within 15 minutes, the street had transformed. 8 men, ranging from their 40s to early 60s, each carrying the quiet confidence of people who'd found their way back from dark places. They wore work clothes, painters' coveralls, electricians' shirts, mechanics' jackets, but moved with the coordinated precision of old teammates. Neighbors began emerging from houses. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop stepped onto her porch, clutching her morning coffee. The teenage boy from yesterday appeared at his bedroom window, phone ready. But instead of fear, their faces showed curiosity, even cautious hope. What's the plan? Marcus asked Eli quietly. Legal first, always legal, but visible. Mrs. Vega's been targeted by predators. Time they understood she's not alone. Across the street, the black sedan reappeared, parking in its usual spot. The driver, one of yesterday's men in suits, studied the gathering with obvious concern. Speaking rapidly into his phone, Eli noticed too. Mrs. Vega, I want you to go inside the laundromat. Lock the door. We're going to handle this properly. But I need you safe while we do. She started to protest. But Carlos placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Señora, we know what we're doing. Your husband taught us that protection doesn't mean violence. It means community. As she retreated inside, watching through the window, more neighbors emerged. Roberto hobbled over from his apartment above the grocery store. Mrs. Patterson drove up, parking behind Marcus's truck, even quiet. Mr. Kowalski appeared, carrying a thermos of coffee and a lawn chair. The street was waking up, and for the first time since Miguel's death, Marisol felt like she wasn't facing the world alone. Through the laundromat window, she watched Eli distribute papers to his friends. Clipboards, pens, notebooks. They were organizing, documenting, preparing, but most importantly, they were staying. By noon, Eli's group had transformed Mrs. Chen's flower shop into an impromptu legal aid station. Marcus, who'd earned a paralegal certificate during his transition years, spread documents across folding tables while Carlos documented property records on his laptop. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to signatures on Marisol's foreclosure papers. The notary stamp is dated 3 months before Mrs. Vega allegedly missed her first payment. That's impossible. A young woman with auburn hair and tired eyes approached the table. Excuse me, I'm Sarah Martinez, third-year law student at Harbor Community College. I heard you might need help with document review. Eli looked up from a stack of property deeds. You know anything about real estate fraud? Wrote my last semester paper on predatory lending practices targeting senior citizens. This whole situation screams illegal. She examined Marisol's papers with practiced efficiency. These mortgage modification terms weren't filed with the county clerk, and this power of attorney document. The witness signature is clearly forged. While they worked, neighbors continued arriving with offerings that spoke of community bonds stronger than anyone had realized. Mrs. Patterson brought homemade cornbread and coffee in a large thermos. Roberto appeared with a pot of pozole that filled the flower shop with rich, warming scents. The teenage boy, introduced as Kevin, helped organize documents while his mother, Diana, made phone calls to local news outlets. Channel 7 wants to send a reporter, Diana announced. Human interest story about neighborhood solidarity. Good, Eli said. Sunlight kills most infections. Across the street, the men in suits had multiplied. 4 now, standing beside 2 black sedans, speaking in urgent clusters while occasionally glancing toward the flower shop. The thin man from yesterday paced between the cars, gesturing sharply at his phone. Sarah looked up from her legal pad. Mrs. Vega, I've contacted the state attorney general's office about this mortgage company. Turns out they're already under investigation for similar schemes in 3 other coastal communities. Your case could be the evidence they need for prosecution. Marisol, who'd been quietly observing from behind the counter, felt tears building. You really think we can stop this? Ma'am, Carlos said gently. I've been in construction for 15 years. You know what I learned. Foundation problems don't fix themselves. You ignore them. The whole structure collapses. But you address them early, with the right help. Most houses can be saved. Eli stood, studying the men across the street. Speaking of foundations, we need to discuss something. This isn't random targeting, Mrs. Vega's property sits on prime coastal real estate. 3 blocks from here, there's preliminary surveying for a luxury development project. City council meets about zoning changes next month. So this isn't just about my house, Marisol said. No, ma'am. This is about clearing out longtime residents to make room for vacation rentals and timeshares. His jaw tightened. It's about erasing neighborhoods that have character and history because they're not profitable enough. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing aerial photos he'd downloaded. Look at this. Your block, Mrs. Patterson's block, Roberto's building, all flagged for redevelopment assessment in city planning documents. They're not just taking your house. They're dismantling Harbor Falls one family at a time. The flower shop fell quiet except for the distant sound of ocean waves. Everyone understood now. This wasn't just about helping one elderly widow keep her home. This was about protecting a way of life. So what do we do? Mrs. Patterson asked. Eli looked around the room, at reformed men with calloused hands, at neighbors who'd found courage in solidarity, at a law student willing to fight powerful interests, At an elderly woman whose husband had believed in second chances. "We fight," he said simply. "Legally, publicly, and together. Miguel taught me that honor isn't about what you take. It's about what you protect." By evening, Harbor Falls Main Street buzzed with quiet activity. Word had spread through the community like morning fog, reaching corners of the neighborhood that had been silent for years. Mrs. Chen's flower shop had become an unofficial community center. Folding chairs appeared from various homes, creating a meeting space that spilled onto the sidewalk. Roberto brought extension cords and strung lights between the shop's awning and a nearby tree, casting warm illumination over the gathering. "I need to tell you all something," announced Elena Vasquez, a woman in her 50s who'd driven over from the next neighborhood. She held a manila envelope stuffed with papers. "This happened to my block 6 months ago. Same company, same tactics. We lost 4 families before we understood what was happening." She spread photographs across the table. Empty lots where houses used to stand, construction equipment, signs advertising luxury condominiums starting at $800,000. "They target elderly homeowners first," Elena continued. "People on fixed incomes, people who don't have lawyers on speed dial. They use falsified documents, predatory lending modifications, anything to create legal confusion. By the time families realize what's happening, the foreclosure process is too far advanced to stop." Diana, Kevin's mother, raised her hand. "My husband works for the city planning office. He's been wondering why so many zoning variance requests have been fast-tracked lately. Properties that were denied commercial development for decades suddenly getting approved in emergency sessions." Eli listened carefully. Taking notes around him, his old crew maintained watchful positions. Carlos monitoring the street, Marcus documenting everything with photographs, others engaging in quiet conversations with neighbors who'd been hesitant to approach. "Mrs. Vega?" Sarah called from the legal station. "I've been reviewing city council meeting minutes. Your property specifically appears in discussions from 8 months ago, before your husband passed away." Marisol's face drained of color. "Before Miguel died." "Yes, ma'am. Someone's been planning this for almost a year." The gathering grew more somber as the implications settled in. This wasn't opportunistic fraud targeting a vulnerable widow. This was calculated, long-term strategy designed to clear valuable coastal land for redevelopment. A new voice spoke from the edge of the crowd. "Excuse me, I think I can help." Everyone turned to see an elderly man with silver hair and a well-worn suit approaching slowly, leaning on a carved walking stick. "I'm Judge William Santos, retired from the county circuit court. I live 3 blocks up the hill." He paused, studying the gathering with sharp eyes. "I've been watching the cars parked on our street all week. Men in suits who don't belong in residential neighborhoods makes an old judge curious." Eli stepped forward respectfully. "Your Honor, we're trying to help Mrs. Vega fight what appears to be mortgage fraud." "I assumed as much." Judge Santos moved to the document table, his experienced eyes scanning papers with practiced efficiency. "May I?" Sarah handed him Marisol's file. He read in focused silence, occasionally making soft sounds of disapproval. "This is amateur hour criminal work," he said finally. "Forged notarizations, backdated modifications, witness signatures that wouldn't fool a first-year law student." He looked up at Marisol with kind eyes. "My dear, you're not just a victim of fraud. You're evidence of it." "What does that mean?" Marisol asked. "It means tomorrow we're going to the district attorney's office together. It means Channel 7 is going to have their human interest story. And it means whoever is behind this operation just made a very serious mistake." Across the street, the men in suits appeared increasingly agitated. 2 had phones pressed to their ears in urgent conversation. The thin man kept gesturing toward the flower shop, his body language growing more animated by the hour. "They're scared," Carlos observed quietly to Eli. "Good," Eli replied. "Miguel always said that bullies count on people staying isolated and afraid. Hard to intimidate a whole neighborhood." As if to emphasize his point, more neighbors arrived carrying folding chairs, blankets, and food. The evening was taking on the feeling of an impromptu block party, but with an underlying current of determination that made the ocean air itself seem charged with possibility. The anonymous letters started appearing before dawn. Eli discovered the first one slipped under his apartment door, a plain white envelope containing a typed message. "Your friends have families. Consider their safety." No signature, no return address, but the threat was unmistakably clear. Carlos found a similar note on his truck windshield. Marcus discovered one taped to his toolbox. Each message varied slightly. but the underlying warning remained consistent: back away or face consequences. Classic intimidation, Judge Santos observed when they gathered at the flower shop that morning. Designed to create fear without crossing into legally actionable territory. Whoever's behind this has experience with psychological pressure tactics. But if the anonymous threats were meant to discourage Eli's group, they had the opposite effect. Instead of retreating, the reformed men quietly reorganized into protective patterns that spoke of old skills applied to new purposes. Carlos began arriving an hour early each morning, checking the street for unusual activity before neighbors started gathering. Marcus established a rotation schedule, ensuring someone trustworthy was always visible on the block. Others took turns walking past Mrs. Vega's house throughout the day, casual but watchful. "It's like they're guarding the whole neighborhood," Mrs. Patterson whispered to Roberto as they watched the steady, unobtrusive patrol. But the pressure escalated. Sarah's car tires were found deflated Tuesday morning. Judge Santos received a phone call at 3 a.m. Silence, then a hang-up. Mrs. Chen discovered her flower shop window had been soap-soaked with threats she couldn't quite make out, but didn't want to. "They're testing boundaries," Eli explained to Marisol as they sat in the laundromat Tuesday evening, "seeing how far they can push before we push back." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not for myself. For all of you, you've done enough. Maybe I should just—" "Mrs. Vega," Eli's voice carried the same gentle firmness Miguel had possessed. "What do you think your husband would say if he saw his neighborhood being bullied into silence?" She considered the question, hearing Miguel's voice in her memory. He'd say that giving in to bullies doesn't make them go away. It just teaches them they can win. Exactly. That evening, the community gathering took on a different tone. Instead of the previous day's hopeful energy, the mood was determined, almost grim. People spoke in lower voices, glanced more frequently toward the street, maintained closer physical proximity to one another. Diana arrived with devastating news from her husband's city planning office. The zoning variance request for this entire block has been fast-tracked for emergency approval. City Council meets Thursday evening. If it passes, all these properties get rezoned for commercial development. Which means, Roberto asked, eminent domain. The city can force sales at assessed value, regardless of owner consent. The gathering fell silent. Even with all their legal documentation, community support, and media attention, bureaucratic machinery could still override individual property rights. Judge Santos stood slowly, his walking stick tapping against the sidewalk. "Then Thursday evening, we attend City Council meeting. All of us. Will that help?" Marisol asked. The retired judge smiled grimly. "My dear, I've presided over 40 years of legal proceedings. I've learned that public officials behave very differently when they're making decisions in front of constituents versus behind closed doors." Eli looked around the circle of faces. Neighbors who'd found courage in solidarity. Reformed men who'd discovered that protection could be honorable. Legal advocates willing to fight powerful interests. "Thursday, then," he said. "We show them what community looks like when it stands together." Across the street, the black sedan sat empty in the gathering dusk, but somewhere in Harbor Falls, phones were ringing, plans were being adjusted, and powerful people were discovering that some neighborhoods don't surrender quietly. Harbor Falls City Hall hadn't seen a crowd this size in 20 years. By 6 p.m., the small council chamber was packed beyond capacity, with overflow seating extending into the hallway and lobby. Marisol sat in the front row between Eli and Judge Santos, her hands folded tightly in her lap, surrounded by faces she'd come to know over the past week, reformed men who'd become guardians, neighbors who'd found their voices, legal advocates armed with evidence. The 5 council members looked visibly uncomfortable as they filed in. Mayor Patricia Hendricks, a thin woman in her 60s, scanned the packed room with obvious surprise. "This evening's agenda includes routine business and one zoning variance request," she announced, her voice echoing in the unusually full chamber. "We ask that public comments be limited to—" "Point of order," Judge Santos interrupted. Standing with formal dignity, "The public has a right to address matters affecting their property and community. I trust the council will honor that right fully." Mayor Hendricks recognized him immediately. "Of course, Judge Santos. The council welcomes community input." When the zoning variance reached the agenda, Sarah Martinez approached the podium carrying a thick folder of documentation. Her voice was clear and professional as she presented evidence of fraudulent foreclosure proceedings, forged documents, and systematic targeting of elderly homeowners. "This isn't simply a zoning request," she concluded. "It's the culmination of an organized scheme to displace longtime residents through illegal means. The city council is being asked to legitimize theft. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Councilman Robert Walsh, a real estate developer who'd sponsored the variance request, attempted damage control. These are serious allegations, but they don't change the fact that this development project will bring jobs and tax revenue to Harbor Falls. Built on stolen land, Roberto called from the audience, his normally quiet voice carrying surprising strength. Order, Mayor Hendricks said weakly. Then Marisol stood up. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. My name is Marisol Vega. I've lived in Harbor Falls for 40 years. My husband Miguel owned the Mercado on Pine Street until he passed away. He believed in this community. He believed that neighbors take care of each other. She paused, looking directly at each council member. Last week, strangers with false papers tried to steal my home, not through legal foreclosure, but through lies and forgery. They counted on me being too old, too scared, too alone to fight back. Her voice grew stronger. But I wasn't alone. This community, these reformed men who my husband helped years ago, these neighbors who've lived here for decades, these young people willing to fight for justice, they stood with me. She gestured toward the packed room. Every person here has a stake in Harbor Falls' future. We're not against progress. We're against theft. We're against powerful interests destroying neighborhoods to increase their profit margins. The room erupted in sustained applause. When quiet returned, Mayor Hendricks called for the vote. All in favor of approving the zoning variance request. Councilman Walsh raised his hand. Alone, all opposed, 4 hands rose immediately. The variance request is denied. The crowd's cheer was deafening, but Eli noticed something else. Through the chamber's windows, the black sedans in the parking lot were pulling away quickly. Their occupants apparently having heard enough as people began filing out, celebrating and making plans for continuation of their neighborhood watch. Judge Santos approached Marisol with a broad smile. My dear, that was magnificent advocacy. Miguel would have been very proud. Marisol looked around the room at faces that had become dear to her. Carlos adjusting Mrs. Patterson's coat, Marcus showing Kevin how to properly organize legal documents, Sarah collecting contact information from other community members who'd discovered similar property targeting. I think he is proud, she said softly. All of them are. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, with ocean breezes carrying the scent of salt and possibility through Harbor Falls streets. Marisol woke to the sound of hammering, not construction equipment, but the gentle rhythm of careful repair work. She looked out her kitchen window to see Carlos on her roof, replacing shingles that had been damaged during winter storms she'd been unable to afford fixing. By the time she dressed and made coffee, half the neighborhood had materialized in her yard. Marcus was repainting her front door, its original blue color. Mrs. Patterson knelt in the garden, planting marigolds and cosmos that would bloom through fall. Roberto had somehow procured a replacement for her broken porch light, not just functional, but beautiful, with beveled glass that cast prismatic rainbows across her front steps. What's all this? Marisol asked, stepping outside with her coffee mug. Maintenance day, Eli said, emerging from under her kitchen sink where he'd been tightening pipes. Every home needs regular care. Yours has been neglected too long. Diana and Kevin arrived with paint supplies and cleaning materials. Sarah showed up carrying legal documents and wearing work clothes instead of her usual professional attire. Even Judge Santos appeared, trading his formal suit for casual clothes and carrying a small toolkit. I may be retired, he said with a grin, but I still know how to hang pictures straight. The work progressed with easy conversation and shared meals. Mrs. Chen brought lunch for everyone. Sandwiches, fresh fruit, and sweet tea that tasted like summer. Roberto contributed a pot of his famous black beans and rice. Carlos's wife Maria appeared with homemade tamales that filled the house with wonderful aromas. This feels like the old days, Mrs. Patterson said, taking a break from weeding to survey the activity. When I first moved here, neighbors actually knew each other, helped each other. Still do, Marcus replied, balancing on a ladder while cleaning gutters. Just took a crisis to remind us. But the day's most significant moment came when Sarah approached Marisol with an official-looking envelope. This arrived at the law clinic yesterday. Addressed to you. Marisol opened it carefully, scanning the legal language with growing amazement. It's from the mortgage company. They're dropping all foreclosure proceedings and offering compensation for the fraudulent documents. State Attorney General's investigation moved fast once they had your evidence, Sarah explained. Turns out Harbor Falls was part of a much larger operation targeting coastal communities across 3 states. Your case helped break it open. Eli paused in his pipe work, looking up with satisfaction. Miguel always said that doing the right thing creates ripples, bigger than you expect, reaching further than you can see. As afternoon faded toward evening, the repairs were complete. Marisol's house looked better than it had in years. Fresh paint, functioning systems, a garden that promised months of color and growth, but more importantly, the neighborhood looked different too. Porch lights were on in houses that had seemed abandoned. Sidewalks showed evidence of recent cleaning and care. Children played in yards where parents now watched from front steps, instead of behind drawn curtains. "I don't know how to thank you all," Marisol said, as tools were packed away and paintbrushes cleaned. "No need," Carlos replied. "Miguel's debt is paid, but the friendship, that's just beginning." Kevin, who'd been documenting the day's work with his phone camera, looked up from reviewing his videos. "Mrs. Vega, you should see these. The whole neighborhood transformation. All in one day. It's like watching a community remember how to be a community." As the sun set over Harbor Falls, casting golden light across streets that felt safer and more connected than they had in years, Marisol understood that something precious had been rebuilt. Not just her house, but the bonds that made a neighborhood worth protecting. 3 months later, Harbor Falls hosted its first annual community day in decades. Pine Street was closed to traffic, transformed into a block party that stretched from the Ocean View Park to the renovated downtown core. Local musicians performed on a small stage erected in front of Mrs. Chen's flower shop, while food booths offered everything from Roberto's famous pozole to Maria's tamales to Mrs. Patterson's legendary apple pie. Marisol walked slowly through the celebration, accepting hugs and greetings from neighbors who'd become family. Her house, now fully restored and legally secure, served as the unofficial headquarters for the Harbor Falls Neighborhood Protection Initiative, a formal organization that had grown from their impromptu legal defense into a model for coastal communities facing similar pressures. "Mrs. Vega," called a familiar voice. She turned to see a young woman approaching with a notebook and camera. "Lisa Chen, Harbor Falls Community Newsletter. Could I get a quote about today's celebration?" Marisol smiled, remembering her terror at facing reporters just months before. Today feels like Harbor Falls remembering who it is, not just pretty houses by the ocean, but people who care about each other. Near the legal aid booth, Sarah Martinez was training volunteer advocates from neighboring communities. Judge Santos held court at a picnic table. Regaling children with stories about the importance of civic participation, Carlos had set up a workshop demonstration, showing teenagers how to do basic home repairs. But it was Eli she was looking for. She found him at the far end of the street, standing quietly beside a small memorial garden that the community had planted in Miguel's honor. Colorful flowers surrounded a simple stone bench with a brass plaque reading, "Miguel Vega, believed in second chances." "I've been thinking about something," Marisol said, settling beside him on the bench. "What's that?" "The day I called you, I was so desperate I didn't think about what I was asking. I just knew Miguel trusted you. So I trusted you too." She paused, watching children play games while their parents laughed and shared food. "But now I understand what he knew about you." "What's that?" "That redemption isn't about forgetting who you used to be. It's about choosing who you want to become, every single day." Eli nodded slowly. Miguel saw that in all of us before we saw it in ourselves. From her purse, Marisol withdrew a small wrapped package. "I have something for you, for all of you." Inside was a wooden frame containing the original number 47 that Miguel had written years ago, now mounted alongside a group photograph from Community Day, showing all the reformed men who'd answered the call, surrounded by neighbors they'd helped protect. At the bottom of the frame, in carefully scripted lettering, was a new message, in memory of Miguel Vega, who understood that honor isn't what you take, it's what you protect. From the Harbor Falls family, with gratitude that reaches beyond words. Eli held the frame carefully, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "This belongs in my kitchen, where I can see it every morning. Reminder of what matters." "Miguel would like that," Marisol said softly. As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, families gathered their children in folding chairs, but the conversations continued on, front porches and in driveways. The black sedans that had once haunted their street were gone, replaced by children's bicycles and neighbors' cars. Marisol sat on her front steps, watching Eli help Carlos pack up the workshop equipment while Marcus coordinated cleanup volunteers. These men who'd once been sources of community fear had become pillars of community strength. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up story about the Neighborhood Protection Initiative. National interest from other coastal communities. You up for being interviewed again? She typed back. Only if Eli and the others are included. This was never about just me. As Harbor Falls settled into peaceful evening quiet, Marisol reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all together. A desperate kiss on the cheek, a 20-year-old phone number, and a debt of honor had transformed not just her life, but an entire community's understanding of what protection really meant. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of trust, and the courage to believe that everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing. The ocean breeze carried the sound of distant laughter and the promise of tomorrow's possibilities. What moments of unexpected kindness have changed your own community? Have you ever witnessed how one person's courage can inspire others to stand up for what's right? Would you like another story?